Anyway, that's one of the benefits of COVID, if you can say there are any benefits. But it's a good way to start. We have gone through an incredible several years here between COVID and what's happening in the Ukraine. We see once again the violence and the missiles in Israel and Eretz Yisrael, and we're hearing about new waves of COVID and monkeypox, and you begin to wonder, boy, what's happening with our world? Where is the hope? Where is all of this going? It's good to put it into context and to remember not only is God is on the throne, but our people, the Jewish people, have been through a whole lot worse. And it's sometimes good to draw on that wisdom and to say, how do we find hope? How do we go on when things seem hopeless and out of control? Shabbat Nachamu, the Sabbath of comfort, traditionally follows right after Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And the 9th of Av among Orthodox Jewish people is a, I won't that go forward. My slides are not advancing. Hold on, for some reason it stopped the slideshow. Let's see if we can go ahead. I'll do it manually then. There we go. There we go. Alrighty. Among Orthodox Jewish people, the 9th of Av is a day of solemn fasting, and you can see this recorded as far back in the Bible as the prophet Zechariah in chapter 7. He speaks of two fast days, one in the 5th month, which would be the 9th of Av, and the other in the 7th month, the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So this was already established as a solemn fast day as far back as Zechariah's time, coming back from the Babylonian exile. The day is preceded by 3 weeks of mourning, beginning on the 17th of Tammuz. Again, that's rabbinical tradition, but why the 17th of Tammuz? 17th of Tammuz was supposedly the day that the Roman armies breached the walls in Jerusalem before the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So it begins this period of sadness and reflection and remembering. On that day of the 9th of Av, in addition to fasting, people chant the book of ISAIAH, the book of Lamentations, and they sing kinot, dirges and elegies. So it's not a happy holiday. Why? What is this? What is this holiday commemorating? What are we remembering? Now, I believe there's no accidents with God, no coincidences. But when you examine this date, there's some incredible, of all the tragedies that have happened to our Jewish people, there are some incredible, horrible tragedies that happened on this date. Primary ones being the destruction of the temple. On this date in 587, the Babylonian armies burned the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple, to the ground. And what followed was the Babylonian exile. Nearly 650 years later, now listen to this, on this same date, the Roman armies burned to the ground Herod's temple. This was the temple that stood at the time of Yeshua, and the disciples worshiped in this temple until it was burned to the ground. A terrible, horrible tragedy. We know that according to the Jewish historian Josephus, and whether he was exaggerating or not, we know that it was a terrible tragedy. The temple was burned, Jerusalem was destroyed, and nearly 1 million Jews were slaughtered in the conflict. Many of the rest sent off into slavery and exile. So it was a terrible tragedy. Now that would have been enough, if those were the only things. We at Passover we sing Dayenu about the good things God has done. We would say with this Dayenu, that's enough, got enough tragedy on this date. But listen to this. Here's the list of things that we believe happened on this date in the Jewish calendar, the 9th of Av. According to the rabbinic tradition, this was the day that the 12 spies came back from spying out the land. In the book of Numbers, you could read about this. And 10 of them came back with an unfaithful and evil report saying, it's beautiful, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but there's giants in the land. We can't do it. There's no way, turn back. We're outnumbered. And because of that, the children of Israel refused to believe. And they were destined then to wander in the desert for 40 years. When did this happen? According to rabbinic tradition, on the 9th of Av. Okay, you would say, okay, that's enough. We're ready with this date. We go forward 2 generations after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. 135. If you know Jewish history, this was one of the most glorious events that had happened in Jewish history. A great Jewish general, a strategist, military strategist by the name of Shimon bar Kokhba, managed brilliantly to overthrow Roman occupation. Now understand, this is the height of Roman power and might. This was unheard of for a tiny little group of people like this to rebel and throw the Roman armies out of the land of Judea and begin to reestablish Jewish self-rule for the first time in 2 generations. The Romans responded with absolute crushing might, put down the rebellion, and the final resistance took place at a place called Beitar in 135. By this point, Rabbi Akiva and many of the rabbis had begun to think that maybe Kosovo was the Messiah. He was going to lead his people to freedom. And he was given the honorific name Bar Kokhba, the son of the star. We know that from the prophecy in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but afar. A star will rise out of Judah. This was the honorific title of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. He was going to lead the people to victory and to freedom. Now, it's interesting that the followers of Yeshua were asked to join in the rebellion. Many of them, of course, Jewish believers in Yeshua. And even if they sympathized with what Bar Kokhba was doing, they could not join with him because obviously they could already see he was a false Messiah. And this would not end well, and of course it didn't. And so at Beitar, the Roman legions outnumbering the resistance, crushed the resistance, and again, great bloodshed. The Romans recorded that in their vengeance for this rebellion, the horses were up to their knees in blood. Thousands were slaughtered that day. What day did Beitar fall? It fell on the 9th of Av. 1 year later, the Roman armies and authorities, to make sure that there would be no remembrance of Israel, to wipe the history of Israel off the map. And this is important. They plowed the Temple Mount under and rededicated it to a Roman god, a pagan god. Horrible thought. And then in order to wipe Israel out of the history books, the Romans were smart. They did their history, they did their research, and they looked up, they said, who's the worst enemy of the Jewish people? And they found, as they read through the Bible, the Philistines. And so they decided, we're going to rename this area, which had been called Judea and Samaria. We're going to rename this area in the Latin Palestia. And it's where we get the modern name Palestine from. Why is that important? It's important, not only was it a tragedy, But if you have a Bible at home that says Palestine at the time of Yeshua, at the time of Jesus, the history is wrong. There was no Palestine at the time of Jesus. Just a little side note there. But again, this tragedy, when did this tragedy take place? The 9th of Av. There are many others. I could probably take a half an hour. Again, I don't see coincidences here. I see God's hand reaching to his people, saying, wake up, come to me. In 1290, King Edward I of England expelled the Jewish people from the land of England. And then 200 years later, one of the most tragic expulsions that we read about in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella issued the Alhambra decree and expelled the Jewish people from the land of Spain and from all the colonies that Spain ruled over in those days. 1492, as many as 70,000 Jews were cast out of Spain, forced to either convert to Christianity or to leave their homes. Many of them had lived there for close to 1,000 years. And the only good thing that I think came out of it was the wonderful Sephardic culture that comes out of those who were cast out of Spain throughout the Mediterranean and many of parts of Latin America. We see the beautiful Sephardic culture that came from those exiles, from those Jewish exiles from Spain. This sounds pretty bleak. So where's the hope? Where do we find hope in this? I think one of the things we see with our Jewish people is that sometimes in the midst of the darkness, our sense of humor comes out. We see hope in the humor. I saw a story this past week of a group of partisans during World War II. They were plotting in their resistance to the Nazis to try to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And so they drew lots who was going to do the deed. And the lot fell upon two elderly Jewish grandmothers who were part of the partisan group, the resistant group. They dropped them in behind enemy lines into Berlin, and they did their research. There's this place each day where Hitler would walk down a street to go to lunch. So these two old boobies are waiting for Hitler to come by at the right time. Noon, he's like clockwork. He comes by every day and he doesn't come. No sign of Adolf. 12:15, Adolf doesn't show up. 12:30, they wait for an hour. No sign of the dictator. One of the boobies looks at the other one of the grandmas looks at the other and says, I wonder where he is. I hope nothing's happened to him. In the midst of tragedy, there's hope, there's humor. And we see this in this pattern of these haftarahs, because as I said, the 9th of Av is preceded by 3 weeks of mourning and reflection. But then following it, 7 weeks, the message that we hear over and over again, beginning with this week's haftarah, is one of comfort and consolation. 7 weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. It's a message of comfort. And as I said, I believe these were the passages that Shaul was reflecting upon in times when his life was going terribly wrong, sitting in prison, being unjustly, unfairly accused, being beaten, being shipwrecked, ultimately waiting for his execution. I love reading Philippians, such a joyful letter that he writes, filled with hope and joy, and he's writing it from prison. It's a message to us. So the world is out of control, and yet we have a great hope, as we just sang from Isaiah 51. God is the one who is our comfort. We find comfort in him. And as believers and disciples of Yeshua, we have a Messiah who understands fully. Right? We read in the book of the Hebrews, we read in Hebrews chapter 4, he is like us in every way, yet without sin. He empathizes. He has understood our struggles because he's experienced them. 2, Isaiah says he's a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. Right before this, we could say, God, you don't understand. You don't understand what it is to struggle. You don't understand what it is to grieve over people that you've lost because you've never experienced that. Now God can say, look to the cross. I fully understand. Secondly, we have a Mashiach, a Messiah, who not only empathizes and has entered in, but his heart breaks for his people. I love that passage in Matisyahu. It's also repeated in Luke, where Yeshua, he's about to go to die on that terrible tree for you and for me. He's about to be betrayed by people he trusted. And he stands over Jerusalem. I don't know about you and me, but if it were me, I would have a hard time forgiving Jerusalem at that point. And yet, not only does he forgive, he prays, and his heart is breaking. He weeps over Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets. And listen to his tender words. How often I've longed to gather you under my wings like a mother hen gathers her chicks. That's the heart of our Messiah. Even now he is crying, hurting, brokenhearted for his people's suffering and brokenness. He understands what we're going through fully. There's a wonderful story. It's told as literature, as poetry, that one of the largest Hebrew Catholic churches in Budapest, during World War II, the Nazis were coming in and rounding up the Jews, and they didn't care what you believed. If you had a grandparent who was Jewish, you were Jewish. So they were deporting the people from this Hebrew Catholic congregation. And they were gathered for one last worship, and then the Nazi soldiers showed up and started herding them onto the trains for the death camps. And the story expresses so beautifully. It says that in this Hebrew Catholic church, where there was a crucifix and a statue of Mary, that when the church had emptied out, that Yeshua came down from the cross and said to Mary, Mother, our people are going, and we must go with them. His heart breaks for all of our brokenness. Lastly, we see in Mashiach Yeshua that he's shed blood. He is the God of all comfort. He's shed blood. He's taking on our brokenness on the tree, on the cross. There's power in that blood to heal and transform all of our wounds, all of our, not just to forgive our sins, but to heal all of our brokenness physically, spiritually, emotionally. We will be made whole by his shed blood. So there's great hope here, isn't there? There's great hope here. And in fact, Yeshua spoke of that hope while he was on earth. Before the temple was destroyed, in speaking with the Jewish religious leaders who were caught up in the bureaucracy of the temple, much of the corruption of the temple, he says, don't you understand? someone greater than the temple is here. Something greater, someone greater than the temple is here. And when his disciples were looking at Herod's temple, and understand this was an incredible building renewal project. By the time Yeshua and his disciples come to Jerusalem, Herod's renovations had been going on for nearly 40 years. It was quite a project. You can see evidence of that now as you look at the Western Wall, the size of those foundation stones. And the disciples, you get a sense that these sort of country bumpkins from Galilee, they're in Jerusalem and they're just like tourists in Toronto or New York. You know, wow, look at this. How glorious. Never seen anything like it. And Yeshua says, guys, as beautiful as this is, not one stone will be left standing. And that prophecy was fulfilled. We know that when the Roman armies came in and burned Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, that the fire was burning so hot that the treasury that was kept in the temple grounds from the tithes and the offerings, that the treasury, the gold began to melt. And it melted and oozed out through the stones of the temple. And so after the destruction of the temple, the Romans brought engineers in to extract the molten gold from between the stones. And they took so much gold out that the price of gold on the Roman market dropped. That's how much gold they took out of it. In order to do that, they had to pull the rocks out and catapult them down. And you can see this in the archaeology. You see a picture there. Some of those stones came down with such force that there were huge holes left in the pavement. You can still see them when they're dug up from the time of Yeshua. His prophecy was fulfilled. Something greater. This temple, as glorious as it is going to be torn down. Not a stone left standing. And we have to understand as followers of Yeshua that this was a tragedy not only for what became rabbinic Judaism, but for the followers of Yeshua too. Right? We read in the book of Acts that the disciples were gathering at the temple. They were still worshiping at the temple faithfully. This was important. So it was a tragedy to them too. That's why I believe the book of Hebrews was written as a comfort in that. Don't give up hope. As tragic as this is, we have great hope. Why? Because, as the writer of Hebrews says, we have a better temple. A temple not made with human hands. We have a better sacrifice. The sacrifice of Yeshua is better than the blood of bulls and goats. We have a better high priest. The priests, even if they were good priests, and the priests by the time of Yeshua were not good priests, they were corrupt. But even a good priest would die. They were mortal. They would have to be replaced, re-elected. The writer of Hebrews reminds us we have a priest who understands us, a priest who reigns forever at the side of the throne of grace, and he's interceding. Think about this. He's praying for you. He knows your name. He knows your struggles. He knows your hopes. He's interceding for you right now. That's our great high priest, Yeshua. Here's what I want to close with. We're living in crazy times. And sometimes you scratch your head and feel like, where's the hope? It's all out of control. As I said, we look at what's happening in the Ukraine. We see those heartbreaking pictures of orphans and hospitals that are being bombed. And we think, I didn't think this would happen in the modern world again, and then there it is. We see the missiles falling again in Eretz Yisrael. People running for cover and for safety. Personally, we have experienced COVID. We've lost loved ones. We grieve. And we wonder, what will tomorrow bring? Here's what we need to hear. Our destiny is not this. It is not the circumstances that we see. As beautiful and wonderful as this world is, that's not our destiny. Like Abraham, we are sojourners. We are living in temporary tents. These bodies, as Paul said, are temporary tents. They wear out. If you've been around at all for any amount of years, God has a way of reminding you that these bodies wear out. I won't go into details. I had another surgery this past week, and I don't say that to build sympathy, but I'm saying God has a way to remind us these body parts wear out. Right? You may think, hey, there's a 30-year-old stuck inside here. No, it's not there anymore. These bodies wear out, right? We're sojourners, but we have a destiny. And that picture is given throughout the prophets. It's given clearly in the final book of the Bible. Where is that destiny? There's a day coming when there will be no more hatred and bloodshed, where no one will harm on my holy mountain. There's a day coming when death and tears and mourning, the loved ones we've said goodbye to, we will see them again. And God will wipe away our tears. There is a day coming when, as he's promised, that he will fully gather in the exiled of Israel.
Right.
We're beginning to do that now. It's coming. An end to Galut. Galut is more than just physical exile. It's spiritual exile. We are far from the God who loves us, each one of us hiding like Adam and Eve, covering up. And God pursues us saying, where are you? Come home. There's a day coming when every nation will gather and proclaim him, Yeshua, King of kings and Lord of lords, when every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord.
Amen.
And there's a day coming. And this is what I want to leave us with when we talk about this hope. A day coming of complete restoration and consummation. And sometimes as Messianic believers, as evangelicals, we miss this point. We emphasize the story of the fall and the story of redemption. And that's good, that's important, that's crucial. But there's 4 points. We have to see the whole bird's eye view, the arena view, if you will, of what God is doing. God who created everything good and beautiful. And because of our sin, we messed that up. Sent a Redeemer, not only to heal it, but to restore it. This is not some spiritual pie in the sky by and by. You know, sometimes when I hear people's idea of heaven, you're going to be up there with angels playing harps. That sounds pretty boring to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that for all eternity. I love music, but I don't want to be playing some harp for all eternity. No, God is giving us a picture of what our destiny is. Complete restoration. I will dwell in the midst of them. You will be my people, and I will be your God, just as it was in Eden. That's where we're headed. Now, why does that make a difference? It makes a difference because if we know that, then this, as Paul says, this brief and momentary suffering is like as nothing. It's like the passing of the night. Yeah. Keep your eyes on Yeshua, who's the author and perfecter of our faith. He is our great hope. And this is not the end of the story. It's a wonderful story of a marathon swimmer. And she was training, she was going to swim the marathon swim from, what's the name of the prison out in San Francisco that's now closed? Alcatraz. And the reason that Alcatraz was such a formidable prison was that the waters and the currents in San Francisco Bay were you couldn't get through them. Even if you escaped the guards and the barbed wire, you would drown in the water. She was going to swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. She trained and she trained and she trained. And on the day that she went off, the water was cold, the fog was coming in, there was a boat going with her. Make sure that if she couldn't make it, they could pull her out. She swam, she swam, she swam, and she swam to the point of exhaustion. Her muscles were cramping. She finally said, I can't do it, pull me out. And I said, you sure? She said, yes, absolutely. Pull me out, I give up. They pulled her out. 1, 2 more paddles, and there through the fog was the coastline, her goal. It's within sight. It's within sight if we keep our eyes on it. There's a Jewish custom among the Orthodox for Tisha B'Av, that in the afternoon, after this time of mourning, people clean their houses, they sweep their floors and clean their windows. Why are they doing that? They're getting ready. That in the midst of this tragedy, Mashiach is coming. Messiah is coming. Yeshua says that to us, his disciples. Are you ready? Will you be sleeping when the time comes? Can you read the signs of the times? Will come like a thief in the night. Are you ready? Are you ready? What a great promise. What a great hope. I think about those final verses from the book of Lamentations, from ISAIAH. It's verses we know. In fact, we sang some of them. They're sung traditionally on Shabbat when the Torah service is over and the Torah is returned to the ark. We sing these wonderful verses from Lamentations. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadish Yaminu Chadish Yaminu Restore us to you, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew us as in the days of old. Abba, thank you that you are the God of all comfort. Thank you for sending your son, Yeshua, who understands us, who weeps for us, who prays for us, who is broken for us. Strengthen us, comfort us, and may we share that comfort with the people around us. We pray it B'Shem Yeshua, in the name of Jesus. Amen.